Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Bailey's Harbor Town Hall and the 2015 Peninsula Pulse Candidate Forum. I'm Brett Bicoy with the Door County Community Foundation, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Tonight we'll be hearing from candidates for the 1st District of the Wisconsin State Senate, the 1st District of the State Assembly, and Door County Sheriff. Our topics for conversation will largely come from you, the voters of Door County. The community was invited to submit questions by email in advance of this forum, and all of you here tonight are also welcome to submit questions. Your questions should be written on one of the cards scattered throughout the room. You can ask as many questions as you'd like, but please use a separate card for each question. Your question must be addressed to both candidates. After you write your question on a card, simply raise your hand and one of our volunteers will pick them up. If our volunteers sort of raise their hands so we can see who they are. Thank you. Along with the editors of the Peninsula Pulse, we reserve the right to modify your questions for clarity, civility, and fairness. We will also try to vary questions so that we can cover as many topics as time permits this evening. The candidates have drawn straws to determine who will speak first. Each candidate will be given an opportunity to make a 1-minute opening statement. Questions will then alternate between the candidates accordingly. Each candidate will be allowed up to 2 minutes to answer each question. We will ask questions for 30 minutes or until we run out of questions. At the end of 30 minutes, each candidate will be given 3 minutes for their closing statements. Our hope is that the candidates will focus on what they believe and what they intend to do should they be elected or re-elected. We also hope that they will give specific responses to the questions that are being asked. An additional 30 seconds may be granted to a candidate at the discretion of the editors of the Peninsula Pulse or the moderator to respond to a particularly egregious accusation or to answer a follow-up question requesting a more detailed response. Our great hope, however, is that all of the candidates here before us will expend their time sharing their specific ideas for the future of our beloved Door County and the entire state of Wisconsin. We'd also like to extend our deepest gratitude to the League of Women Voters. For generations, they have been organizing candidate forums in our community, and they have generously let us borrow aspects of their format tonight. On behalf of the Peninsula Pulse, we extend our deepest thanks and appreciation to the League of Women Voters. Finally, out of courtesy to candidates, please silence your mobile phones now. Refrain from any flash photography. We also ask that you refrain from cheering or booing, as the case may be, any response that you particularly like or don't like. Doing those things simply takes away the time for us to ask the questions that we want to ask of the good folks who will come before us. We also ask that you withhold your applause until the end of each section of this forum, with the exception of now, as I introduce the candidates. For the office of Door County Sheriff, please join me in welcoming Sergeant Steve DeLarwell and Lieutenant Tammy Sternard. Lieutenant Sternard has won the toss, and so she will be offering her opening statement first. Lieutenant?
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start off by thanking all of you for attending tonight. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Door County. I grew up in the southern part of the county where I attended Southern Door School. My partner and I live in the town of Brussels. Our 3 younger children, Brady, Sean, and Abby, attend Southern Door School. Our oldest son, Tyler, just returned from Afghanistan. Very proud of him. While working a full-time job, I attended school at NWTC and obtained my associate's degree in criminal justice. I also had the opportunity to attend an executive leadership college for law enforcement administrators. I've worked my way up through the ranks. I began my career 21 years ago as a reserve deputy. My supervisory experience began in 2001 when Sheriff Brand promoted me to OIC of a shift. After that, Sheriff Vogel promoted me again to sergeant and then to my current position today, lieutenant, 4th in command of the department. I bring a rich background of education, experience, proven leadership, and professionalism to the office. As part of the administrative team for the last 7 years, I have a clear understanding of what it takes to run an effective department. Thank you.
Sergeant?
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Peninsula Pulse also. My name is Steve Delarwell. I also am a lifelong resident of Door County, growing up in Forestville. I graduated from Southern Door High School, and after high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I went to work. I started out at Hatco and went on to PBI, where I worked for 10 years. When I saw PBI was nearing the end, I switched to the midnight shift and went to school during the day for law enforcement. I was hired in 1991 at the Sheriff's Department, where I started in the jail and dispatcher. And a year and a half later, I went out on patrol. I worked patrol since then. 12 years ago, I was the OIC on the midnight shift, which is the officer in charge when the sergeant is off. And 4 years ago, I was promoted to sergeant. While I was going back to school, my wife also went back to school for nursing, so we both were in school at the same time. And she's now a nurse in Sturgeon Bay. I have an associate degree in criminal justice from NWTC, a certificate from UW-Platteville in first line supervision, and several other advanced line supervision training courses. I'm also the field training officer for the department, training new deputies coming out on the road. I'm a weapons armor, snowmobile patrol coordinator, and I've been on the SWAT team for the past 19 years. I've been married to my wife Tree for 30 years as of yesterday, and we have raised 2 sons, Corey and Casey. And I appreciate you all coming. Thank you.
It appears that we're having some difficulty hearing in the back of the room, so I'll ask if the candidates can move the microphones about 6 inches closer to them. It's probably a good sign that we have people who are new to elected office. They're politicians yet who aren't really well heard out there, so it's a good thing to look at. The first question is going to go to Sergeant Delarwell. The Federal Excess Property Program, also known as the 1033 program, transfers surplus military equipment to local law enforcement departments. As a part of the program, the Door County Sheriff's Department took possession of an MRAP, a mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle. What is your position on the use of the Federal Excess Property Program? What, if any, surplus military equipment do you feel is appropriate for the Door County Sheriff's Department? And Sergeant, you'd answer this question first.
If you're referring just to the MRAP, that's what we have obtained from the 1033 program. I am, being a member of the SWAT team for 19 years, I am totally for it. The misconception that's been put out there is that this is a tank, that it costs $100,000 every time it leaves the garage. There's all kinds of misconceptions that have been put out in the social media. This is false. This is a rescue vehicle. There's no armament on it, no weapons. There isn't even a place to shoot out of it unless you went out the top turret, which I don't think anybody would be dumb enough to stick their head up. It's a rescue vehicle. If it was originally named the War Machine in the local newspaper, if it would have been described as a personnel carrier, which is what it is, I don't think it would have been as big of an item on people's thoughts. But it's not out on patrol. It's not going up and down your highways. It's not going to break down your houses. It's used to protect the SWAT team on high-risk calls. It's used to save somebody if they were injured. We had a SWAT call where a Sturgeon Bay officer was shot at through a garage. We ended up waiting 2 hours to get a Bearcat from Green Bay to come down, which eventually they did and solved the problem. But if that officer would have been shot and injured, we would have placed more people in harm's way to rescue him just using a van. This machine we could have driven right up and provided protection and got him out safely. It can be used in any kind of Oh, I'm sorry, time is up.
Thank you, Sergeant. Lieutenant?
Could you repeat the question, please?
It's asking your opinion of the federal excess property program. What, if any, surplus military equipment do you feel is appropriate for the Door County Sheriff's Department?
I'm very well aware of the program. I actually have access to go on and look at it and see if there's any materials that we can utilize in our department. I personally have not found any equipment that I feel we could use at this point. As far as the MRAP vehicle, Sheriff Vogel made the decision about a year and a half ago to start pursuing our options and looking at what we could afford in our community and what was out there. As a sheriff, I do feel you have an obligation to keep the officers safe when you're asking to put them in harm's way. We have to remember, there's good policy and procedure in place for the use of that equipment. Steve's a member of the SWAT team. They train with that equipment every month as much as they can. The policy and procedures are there. You have to trust the administration to know when to use it and how to appropriately use it. We never would have been able to acquire that type of equipment that in the event we do need it for a rescue type situation based on the backs of the taxpayers. We never would have done it as a department. We put our name in and we were lucky, one of the lucky counties to acquire the equipment. As Steve said, it's not going to be run downtown parades and different things like that. We know when to use it and how to appropriately use it. And we have to remember, at the end of the day, the officers that we put in harm's way on those calls are the most important person to somebody. And as a sheriff, we have the responsibility and a community to keep them as safe as we possibly can, staying within a reasonable budget. Thank you.
This next question will begin with you, Lieutenant. Unlike most Door County department heads that report to the county board, the sheriff is a constitutionally elected position. In other words, one of you will be the man or woman in charge of a budget of more than $8 million, and you'll oversee nearly 100 employees. What career experience and/or professional skills do you have that will help you make the transition from being a law enforcement professional to also being chief executive officer of one of Door County's largest organizations?
As I said earlier, I started my career at the ground and I worked my way up through the ranks. As a lieutenant right now, I'm responsible for over half of the department. I oversee the corrections and court services of our department. Also, I am part of the administrative team. Our administrative team for the department consists of the sheriff, chief deputy, 2 lieutenants. The 4 of us share the responsibilities. In the event that the sheriff or the chief deputy are not available, either lieutenant is asked and will be required to respond to any situation to help out. So over the last 4 or 5 years, the department has really invested a lot of time and money getting me ready to prepare me to be a future leader. I feel my budget experience alone stands for itself. About a year and a half ago, we all kind of got the feel that Sheriff Vogel was going to retire, and our chief deputy is going to retire shortly after him. He confirmed that he's going to retire in February of 2015. So the sheriff and the chief deputy asked if I would be interested in learning the entire budget for the department. So a year and a half ago, I began working with Chief Deputy Bailing on the budget. I deal with everything as a lieutenant, from employee discipline to employee promotion to hiring to contract management. Liability for the county is huge when you're in an administrative position. I go to as much training to keep us as current as we can in our policies and procedures. I really feel everybody in our department does a great job, but what they need is a leader that has the proven, effective style of leadership that has got us where we are today. And I happen to be one of those people in part of that administrative team. So I believe that I'm prepared. If I didn't feel I was ready to take on this role, I certainly would not be sitting in front of you here tonight. Thank you.
Sergeant?
During this campaign, the budget came up a lot. It seemed to be everybody's perception was that the sheriff is sitting at his desk with a calculator doing the budget all by himself. The sheriff does not do the budget by himself. It's a collaboration of, like Tammy said, the lieutenants, the chief deputy, the law enforcement committee, the county board, and finance. I can do a budget. I can work with all of these entities to get a budget done, and we will be fiscally responsible doing it.
Thank you. When the Justice Center was being built, renting out bed space to other counties was very much talked about as a way to generate revenue for our community and to help defray some of the costs of operating the Justice Center. Are we currently doing this? To what degree? If we are not doing this, should we be doing more of this? And that question first goes to you, Sergeant Dellerwell.
We are doing it. We don't have anybody right now. The state had numerous people with us, but they were running a budget problem too and having trouble paying for all these prisoners that they were putting in other jails. We deal with Kewaunee County also, but they don't have anybody. As the last month I saw that we didn't have anybody from Kewaunee County. We do house people from probation and parole that are put back into the jail. We're always looking for people to fill our jail from other counties and from the state, and we'd be more than happy to take them if they're come up with the money to pay for it.
Okay.
Actually, right now, we do have contract beds in our facility. Annually, we get about $225,000 worth of revenue from contract beds. ES Sanctions is the program that Steve was talking about. The state reimburses us $51.46 a day. On average, we have about a dozen of those inmates. Those inmates come from outside of the Door County area, generally speaking, the Valley or Brown County. Actually, I'm currently in negotiations right now with Oconto County. They're finding themselves in the same position we were many years ago of overcrowding. They are planning to build a new facility. They'll open in 2016, and they have asked if I would be interested, or the county would be interested in renting bed space to them. So currently, myself and the sheriff are in negotiations to do that. Obviously, the added revenue would be a good thing. As far as federal inmates, they're not interested in Door County. We're too far out of their way. Basically, their last stop is Brown County. But I do think, we have to always constantly be looking at ways to increase our revenue, offsetting our expenses. A jail facility is not cheap to run. But if you have 4 officers working and you have 75 of our inmates and 25 of another inmate, that's fine. We can handle that. Plus, the revenue that's coming in will offset, like I said, our budget expenses. So it's a good thing, and it's something that we will continue to go after and try to find as much as possible. Thank you.
Wisconsin Act 10, also known as the Wisconsin Budget Repair Bill, dramatically curtailed the right of public workers to organize, and it also required public workers to contribute more to their health insurance and to their retirement. Proponents of this note that it saved $3 billion for Wisconsin taxpayers. Specifically excluded, though, from the public workers affected by this bill were law enforcement professionals and fire department employees. Should Act 10 be amended to include fire and law enforcement professionals? If so, why? If not, how do you justify creating different classes of government employees? We'll begin with you, Lieutenant.
As far as Act 10 and law enforcement goes, in essence, we are really getting that now to a certain extent. All of our new employees, they are contributing fully to their retirement. The collective bargaining agreement obviously limits the management's right to be able to adjust that. I know there's been a lot of talk statewide about should it apply to fire, police and fire. Myself, personally, I don't fall under Act 10. I am non-bargaining, so I pay my retirement and do the other things. Like I said, until the collective bargaining changes, it's going to be extremely difficult. My personal opinion on it is, through the years, half of my career I paid, half my career I didn't. I haven't really realized that much of a difference in my income, but I think it is a bit unfair. The people that have signed up for law enforcement, say 10, 15 years ago, when they took the job, this is what they expected and this is what they signed up for. Law enforcement is very challenging. I can't speak for fire, but we ask these people to be away from their families, to work weekends, to work nights, to respond to situations that most of us can't even imagine. And I do think we do need to treat them fairly. If the state decides to include them, so be it, and then we'll have to deal with it at that point. Thank you.
I agree with Tammy. The sheriff's department or any police department is a different entity than say, a teacher or something like that. Eventually, I believe we will end up all in the Act 10. I think I was told, I don't know if it's true or not, but I was told that it would be, we were exempt for now because it would be harder to replace so many people that would retire all of a sudden to avoid it. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a possibility. Eventually, I think we all will end up paying our fair share. I know ours increased this past year with the new contract. We ended up increasing our contributions to health insurance and to the retirement, and I think it probably will continue in the future.
What would be your approach to decreasing the rate of DUIs in Door County? And we'll begin with you, Sergeant.
The rate of DUIs have decreased in Door County. Working the midnight shift for the past 21 years, I've seen the decrease in OWIs in this county and the decrease, I've seen a change in culture. There are people that are leaving their cars at the bars and getting rides home. We see it all the time. In fact, we did a project on our shift where we rewarded the people that left their cars in the parking lots and got rides, and we talked with the bartenders and the bar owners and had little cards made up to put in their windshield that they got a free soda for being responsible and leaving their vehicles. It was just a small thing. We've on my shift, we've implemented bar checks for every bar and that's open in the county at night. We go in once a month. We at least stop in and talk to the bartenders, see if there's a problem, get to know them a little bit, and we have a good rapport with them and offer assistance if they have a problem with people that are drunk to get them a ride home, and we'll find somebody if they call. It seems to work because the accidents have dropped dramatically on our shift, and you just don't see what we did 10 years ago.
Lieutenant?
I would have to agree with Steve. Our OWI arrests were averaging about 143 a year or so. I think the guys out there doing the job every day, they do an excellent job. Like Steve said, they touch base with the bars and help out. I think, though, the key to that is we want to get that number down. You can't just arrest the problem away. I think you do have to look at solutions. Working in the jail, we do a lot of programming, and I see the benefits of well-thought-out programming affecting people's changing their behavior. I think OWI is not just a law enforcement issue. It's really a community issue. It's a culture issue. You know, a lot of us, there's nothing wrong with having a cocktail now and then, but be responsible about it. It's about helping other people be responsible. Like I said, drinking isn't against the law, but I think as a culture, we kind of sometimes don't do all the things that we can do, and then we just expect people to arrest all the drunk drivers. Well, the effects of drunk driving are far-reaching in the community. They don't just affect the individual that's arrested for drunk driving. They affect their family, their loved ones, somebody else that's injured in an accident. So I think as a sheriff, you have to be kind of upfront about it, and you have to actively participate in any programs that your community is willing to do to try to affect change, whether that be in the schools, in the communities. I know Sheriff Vogel participates in the Alcohol and Drug Coalition Committee. I have sat in on a couple of those meetings, and I would gladly participate in that as well. But again, I think it's more than just arrest the problem away. I think people have to start working together. coming up with some creative ideas and maybe try to find some new solutions to a very old problem here in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Should you be elected sheriff, what would change under your administration and leadership from what we see now under Sheriff Vogel? And that would be directed to you first, Lieutenant.
Obviously, my administrative experience, a lot of people that work in our department, they know what to expect from me. They know how I treat them. They know how I carry out my duties. As far as improvements, what I would plan to do, and I really think this is important, I do it in the correctional division now, and it works very well, is basically doing what I would call an entry evaluation. Sitting down with each individual staff member, finding out from their perspective, what's working, what areas do you think we need to improve upon? Where do you feel we can improve the services within the community? After I'd gather that information, then I'd go out to the community, talk to the business owners, talk to the community members. Obviously, over the last 10 months or so, I've talked to many people, and it's amazing the different perspectives you find out. And some of the things, being born and raised here, you think you know Door County. Surprisingly, people have different opinions, and I think it's important to get people to work together. Take the top 5 issues, whether it's from the employee side or from the public side, and work on those. You can't conquer the world in a day, but I think you can find out what's really important, where we need to make improvements, and concentrate on those things. Like I said, I do that annually in our jail division, and it works very, very well. We don't bite off more than we can chew. We take care of the issues one by one, and the staff being involved in the resolution to those issues, along with the community, I think is a win for both. So, thank you.
Sergeant?
The first thing I would do is get more people involved in our department. What I would do is start an administrative day where the sergeants would work a day shift, all the sergeants, jail and patrol. They would work a day shift off of their regular one. We would all get together, have a roundtable meeting, discuss things that are going on in the department, go through the last month, good and bad, on to the next month, what we need to change, cover policy, procedure, get the sergeants involved. Right now, we have not had a sergeant's meeting with administration in a year and a half. We are not involved. It seems that, I don't know if it's, our opinion isn't valued, or I don't know why it is, but we're not involved. The sergeants are the ones running this county. They're the ones out on patrol. They are the ones that know what's going on, and I believe their opinion is value. I want them involved. I want them to become the future leaders of this department. They need to be involved, and if you give them the chance, they have loads of opinions, and they know what's going on out there. I will also have our administration work different shifts, not just once a month. Everybody in administration would work a second shift, everybody would work a third shift. They need to get involved with the rest of the department and find out who these people are that work for them. Ride along with the patrol. Work in the jail. Get to know everybody. Work in dispatch. Talk to these people. They have opinions, and they're good ones, and they can help this county and help this department.
Is it possible to answer that question?
Well, we're going to, in the issue of fairness, you had your 2 minutes, and so did he. We're going to move on, if that's all right with you. With violence in our schools on the rise, schools in Colorado, Arkansas, and elsewhere are beginning to extend the right to carry a concealed weapon to teachers in the classroom. Legislation to this effect has been proposed in Tennessee and Michigan to varying degrees of success. What is your position on allowing teachers, principals, and/or other school personnel to carry concealed weapons in the school? And we'll start with you, Sergeant.
I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. I would rather see law enforcement in the school with a weapon, but can we afford that? Can the schools afford that? do we have the staffing to supply a deputy in the schools every day? We don't. We offered schools a security person, a special deputy that would go in periodically and go through a 4-hour stint where they'd walk through the schools, and were turned down by most of them. The only one that accepted the offer was Southern Door. Do I see teachers with weapons? I don't think that's a great idea. If they were well qualified, somebody that really knew how to handle a handgun, I guess I wouldn't have a problem with it, but you would have to go through a lot of training to have that with the kids. I'd have to say no.
Lieutenant?
The area of school safety is actually something I've done extensive research on, and my approach or answer to that question is adding school resource officers to the schools that wish to have them. It can be done without increasing the budget. I've done the staffing analysis. I've ran the numbers. We have enough personnel to do some shifting to be able to accomplish that if that is what the community is wanting from law enforcement. Many of my friends are teachers in the schools. We talk about the gun issue all the time. They don't want to carry guns in schools, the ones I know, but they are excited about that option to have a law enforcement officer in the school. So when an incident does occur, they have somebody there to respond in a timely and safe fashion. So I believe strongly in adding the school resource officers. Like I said, I've researched it extensively. I would like to start with a pilot school, develop a program that works for that individual school. We all know from Southern Door to Gibraltar to Washington Island, the school needs are different. But I think one common theme you'll find when you talk to school administrators, if we can accomplish it without increasing their budget, they're open to having us in their schools. Talk to teachers that you know. There's a lot of things that go on in those schools that just, I think, the presence of an officer on a regular basis will affect change. I went to training just about a month ago, and they were talking about school safety, and a startling statistic was it's estimated that 166,000 kids do not go to school each day because of bullying. We can do better. We owe it to our kids to do better. You know, as far as Steve saying we don't have the resources, I don't agree with that. If you do a staffing analysis and you look at the call volume on the road, especially during the school season, is our off season. We have officers available. It's just a matter of shifting and using those resources in a different fashion. I'm not saying it's going to work, but I think we need to try. And that's all I think we can do is put our best foot forward and give it a try. If it works, expand it to all schools. There's a ton of grants out there. If you work hard and you look for them, you can find grant money to help offset expenses with school resources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we are running out of time, so we're going to begin the closing statements. As a reminder, each of you has 3 minutes to comment, and we will begin per the coin flip. The first closing statement will be given by Sergeant DeLarwell.
I have chosen law enforcement as my vocation and very much appreciate the opportunity these past 23 years on the department serving my fellow citizens. It is truly an honor and a special privilege. To be of service to another in need, to offer compassion and support in a time of tragedy and loss, to safeguard and protect during a time of violence, and simply to be present and ready. I have learned and have grown much, and I owe all that to the community of Door County. One of the most rewarding aspects of my job has been the development of new officers. As a field training officer, I was tasked with teaching the proper procedure for the department. However, being a deputy is much more than policy and procedure. Being a deputy of the law requires a sense of fairness. Being a deputy of the law requires resolve, and often a firmness, but above all, being a deputy requires compassion. Being a deputy requires a love for the job, a love for the county, and a love for the country. A love as though they are family, because as a deputy of the law, they are. This is what I believe and what I attempt to instill into deputies I train, and I take pride in seeing them grow in that position. I want them to have the opportunity to grow and have a voice in the direction of our department, because they too will be future leaders. I intend to carry the same commitment and belief to the sheriff's position. I understand the responsibility this requires. I understand that it will require the respect and support of my fellow deputies and staff. I believe that good leadership requires an open mind and careful consideration and input from quality professionals who I work with on a daily basis. I have grown up in this community. It is my family, and I greatly appreciate your continued support to protect and serve as your sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant. Lieutenant?
As a lifelong resident of Door County, a lieutenant and a mother, what happens in our community is extremely important to me. My primary goal will be to continue making Door County a safe place for its residents and visitors, ensuring our schools are safe for our children, and maintaining a community that truly is one of the best places to raise your family. Maintaining a safe community will require a multi-pronged approach. I'd like to just touch briefly on some of the important areas. We talked about it a little bit, but assigning full-time school resource officers will provide a safer environment for our youth, and I believe it is needed. I would start with the pilot school, work with the community partners to develop the proper programs to address the issues affecting our children today. They are going to grow up to be our future leaders. Heroin-related deaths and overdoses are becoming a problem in our community. I will implement a program and model it after a program being used in Sheboygan County. It's a collaborative, community-based initiative, understanding the problem in the community, identifying service gaps that we may have, and increasing community education. This results in increased awareness, education, treatment options, and reducing criminal violations. Internet crimes against children is one of the fastest growing issues in law enforcement. I believe in a proactive approach, staying current with technology, and allotting resources to effectively address the issue. We must continue to work with the local, state, and federal agencies in fighting these crimes. Operating while intoxicated continues to be an issue. The effects on the community can be far-reaching. We need to continue with strict enforcement, but more importantly, to work together to find effective programming to resolve the problem. I vow to foster an environment where individuals are encouraged not only to reach their potential, but to exceed it. Assisting individuals achieving their professional growth and development, I believe, is essential to help ensure as an agency, as a community, we are prepared to meet the needs of today and the challenges of tomorrow. As part of the administrative team for 7 years, I have a clear understanding and working knowledge of all operations. I know what's needed to continue providing high-quality law enforcement services here in Door County while maintaining a fiscally responsible budget. I understand successful organizations require group efforts. We have dedicated individuals who carry out the duties of the sheriff each and every day. It would be my honor and privilege to get the opportunity to lead them into the future. Both personally and professionally, I'm ready to take on this very important role. My experience and years of outstanding service within the Sheriff's Office and in our community makes me the right person to be the next Door County Sheriff. Thank you.
Sergeant Steve DeLarwell, Lieutenant Tammy Sternard, thank you for being here this evening, but also thank you for your many years of service to Door County. Let's please give them a warm round of applause. Candidates for Wisconsin State Assembly, 1st District, Mr. Joel Kitchens and Mr. Joe Majeski.
Joel is in the bathroom right now, so I'll give his opening statement if that's okay. Just wait a minute.
We're more efficient than we realize calling everybody up here. And Mr. Joel Kitchens. We flipped a coin beforehand to see who goes first, and the winner of the coin flip was Mr. Majeski, so he'll be opening here with his 1-minute opening statement. Mr. Majeski.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much for the Pulse for giving us this opportunity to get our message out. Particularly, thank you for attending tonight and to determine the future with your really informed vote. And that's what the democratic process is about. I'm Joe Majeski. I live just down the road here in Jacksonport. You've probably seen some of our signs around. But I grew up way down the road down in Kewaunee County with a business degree in hand, and then I managed the Luxembourg Medical Clinic for about 6 years. My wife Jean and I then moved to Door County with our 3 children, where I previously was the school psychologist in a number of Door County schools, and then was hired at Sevastopol Schools as elementary principal for 24 wonderful years. Just a great community. When I decided on this journey last February, I pledged to knock on over 10,000 doors, listening and learning and hopefully leading, and run a positive, respectful campaign, focusing on the First Assembly, our local issues, our citizens, our children, our future, not political ideologies. I have kept my promises. Negative, misleading, and uncivil campaigning
Mr.
has
Majeski, I'm
no
going to
place
interrupt
in
you
our
out
small,
of
supportive
respect
community.
for the time that we have here.
Oh,
So
I'm
if you
sorry.
don't mind, I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to offer comments
Not a
during the
problem.
question and answer period. And I'm
Yep.
going to ask Mr. Kitchens and give him his opportunity to have his 60-second opening statement.
Yeah, thank you all for being here this evening, and thanks to the Peninsula Pulse for putting this on. It's a great opportunity for you guys to hear the issues. It's great. My wife, Sherry Billett, and I moved here 30 years ago. We were a year out of veterinary school, and we opened our veterinary practice. We were young and naive, and it was not based on research. It was a kind of a ridiculous decision, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life to move to Door County. Our practices have thrived as they've grown, and we've added more veterinarians. They split. I have Door County Veterinary Associates, which I work on large animals, cattle and horses, and she has Peninsula Veterinary Service and works on small animals. We've raised 3 great kids. The youngest one is in college now, and we've immersed ourselves in the community. Among other things, I've been on the Sturgeon Bay School Board for the past 15 years, the past 13 as president. When I came on, we were in a severe financial crisis, but we turned that around, and we've been enjoying a extended period of financial security. I've proven that I'm a strong leader, and I've proven that I can work with both sides to get things done. So I want to bring those skills to Madison, and I want to be the representative that you all deserve.
Thank you. The first question is going to be answered by Mr. Kitchens. Article 10, Section 3 of the Wisconsin State Constitution states that the legislature shall provide by law for the establishment of district schools which shall be nearly as uniform as practicable. How well do you think Wisconsin is living up to this promise of school equality as articulated in our state constitution? Mr. Kitchens.
I don't think we're living up to it very well at all, to be honest. I think that in 1992, we put revenue caps on, and I think it was sort of arrogant of them at that time to think that they could come up with a formula that forever was going to be fair to all the districts. We have rich districts, poor districts, growing and shrinking. I mean, you know, it was done under a Republican governor, Governor Thompson, but I think it was a bad decision, and it took an awful lot of the local control away. So that is going to be one of my priorities. I think that we need to change the funding system for our schools. It's not equitable, and it's not fair.
Okay. Mr. Majeski.
Definitely, we need to change the funding system. It hasn't been looked at for over 20 years. It's antiquated, out of date, does not respect the local needs of the school districts, and it has to be taken a look at. But more importantly, with $1.8 billion being taken out of our public school systems, we need to take a look at funding our schools adequately. Now, when you look at uniformity, that they receive uniform funding, you also have to take a look at the nature of the school itself. We have some schools that are in significant poverty right now. Those are often the schools that students are struggling achieving with. I think we have to take that whatever formula we come up with has to take a look at a serious restructuring of how we look at poverty in our schools and make sure those schools and those children have equal access to a good education.
I'm going to ask you both to elaborate on that last question. I think you both talked about the need to change the funding system, and I don't think anybody would argue with the idea, or I certainly don't hear many people arguing that we shouldn't try to do more to invest in our schools. The question, though, is how. The question is, more specifically, how would you change the funding system? And if you don't have specifics about what that would look like, at least give us some guiding principles that would help us better understand what you would actually do if you had the opportunity to create the ideal funding system for schools in Wisconsin.
That's to me. Well, I think we need to, again, return the local control and allow our school boards to have some power over that. I don't think that simply increasing spending is the answer to making our schools better. And I think Act 10, certainly, we were able to save a lot of money, and that did return a fair amount of local control to us. So those are the things I want to look at. I think that, again, with the formula the way it is, the districts that are growing are putting money in the bank. The districts that are shrinking have to pass referendums to pass and to continue to exist, and that's not fair, and I want to rework that formula.
Let me be very clear. This is something well within my wheelhouse, public financing for school education. I've lived it for 24 years, worked with a number of different budgets and had to make them work. The Department of Public Instruction submitted a very clear proposal to change the funding system last year. Obviously, those folks know the funding system better than anybody else. Unfortunately, our current legislator did not even give it a public hearing. It did not even see the light of day to see if that would effectively work. So let me be very clear. There are two things, or one thing specifically that needs to change. Right now, the funding formula is based primarily on property value and class and school size. We need to take a different look at that. Property value needs to be part of the equation, but income needs to seriously be looked at in funding schools. Sevastopol, in the last 4 years, we've grown from roughly 24 to 25% poverty rate at our elementary school. 4 years later, we're close to 50% poverty rate. Now, yeah, we have very wealthy property. We have a lot of coastline. But we have a lot of folks, a lot of young families that are not making much money, and they're not wealthy. They have a difficult time paying those property taxes. So if we change, we need to take a look at property value, but we also need to take a look at income in funding the schools.
We received several questions about reproductive health care. Now, the issue of abortion is not one that will be settled in Madison. However, in Madison, they enacted a law in 2013 requiring doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of the abortion clinic. Proponents of the law argue that it's necessary to ensure the safety of women who seek abortions. Opponents of the law argue that it's simply an attempt to make abortion more difficult to obtain and point out that the number of clinics has fallen to 4 in the entire state. What is your position on the 2013 law requiring doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at a nearby hospital? And we'll begin with you, Mr. Majewski.
I'm against that enactment completely. We have seen across the state a consistent war on women's rights and women's health care. We've seen it across our nation, and now it's entered into Wisconsin. Very unfortunate. Now, nobody ever wants to be in that situation of having to make a decision about an abortion. Nobody does. It's a painful decision. But I would much rather have that decision lie with that woman, with their family, with their religion, with their doctor, than have some bureaucrats down in Madison making those decisions for our women's health.
Mr. Kitchens?
I'm pro-life, but that will not be my focus when I'm in Madison. I will be focusing on job creation and fiscal matters. As far as restricting abortion rights, I think it really does have to come down to if the restrictions are there where they really are in order to help the safety of it, to help the safety of abortions, then I think those are entirely appropriate. I'm not sure where I would stand on this. I want to look at that a little more closely. If restrictions are put on simply to harass women, then that should not be done. And frankly, those will be thrown out in court as well.
What is your position on the growing expansion of frac sand mining in the state of Wisconsin? Mr. Kitchens?
You know, the areas where the frac sand mining exists tend to be very impoverished areas, and we do need to watch we need to balance between job creation, of course, and environmental concerns. Now, a lot of those areas, they need more local control because that's been taken away from them. So I think that those areas need to have a say in whether those frac sand mines exist. And of course, we need to follow the regulations very closely. We cannot allow that to spoil the water and to spoil the environment. So I think if we have local control and we have strong regulations at the state level to make sure that those things don't happen, that's where it should be.
Mr. Majeski?
I'm not against frac sand mining. We need the jobs in those areas. There's no doubt about it. My position on it, though, is I'm glad to hear Joel say that he's for local control. The folks who live in those areas need to have control over what's happening to their water, what's happening to their air. The silica dust in the air is creating an environmental hazard. They need to be able to have some say in that process. Unfortunately, our current Republican legislature decided to implement, decided to seriously look at bills to take away local control. That was fought by our local county governments, our local town governments, and they backed away from that position. But you can bet it's going to come back again. I'm a huge fan of the local control. One issue that I'm concerned about, though, is if you take a look at Texas and you take a look at Alaska, they are wealthy with their oil. We are wealthy with our sand. In those states, they take a serious look at taxing those areas to fund other areas of the state. Alaska pays no income tax whatsoever, our state income tax whatsoever. We're selling Wisconsin, and we're selling it cheap. We should take a serious look at how we're going to tax and how we're going to sell those areas to places outside of Wisconsin. Now, you can bet that there are very wealthy special interests that are lobbying our legislature right now for those folks to take our sand out of Wisconsin as cheaply as possible. We should not sell it so cheap.
Under Governor Walker's leadership, Wisconsin declined to participate in the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Do you support or oppose the governor's position to decline to accept that Medicare expansion? Why or why not? And we'll begin with Mr. Majeski.
I'm clearly against the governor's position on the Medicare expansion. I'm against it for two reasons. Number one, it would have provided extensive health care for a variety of folks who can't get it right now. But number two is the economy. It would have brought millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars into our economy for our health care, for health care jobs, which maybe would help our current lagging economy, and we wouldn't be last or close to last in the Midwest right now. So for two reasons, I think it was a poor decision. I think it was a political, ideological position, but it was not good for the folks in Wisconsin.
Mr. Kitchens?
I understand why the governor chose to do what he did. The federal government has a long history of setting up programs, getting you involved, and then pulling the plug out and cutting back on the funding. I think it was a poor decision, honestly, with Obamacare to have expanded Medicare to that extent because we can't afford it as a country, and they will cut back the funding. Now, I do not feel obligated to follow what Governor Walker has done when I get down there, so I want to look at it carefully because the estimates have gone up as to what it costs, and we need to look at that very carefully to see if we can continue to afford that. As far as people not having access to health care, I do not believe that that's true. I think they have access to very good health care. It's that window between the poverty level and 33% above that we are concerned about. Those were the ones that were not put onto Medicare because of our decision to decline that. But those people have access to very highly subsidized health care through the exchanges. For a single person, it costs about $6 a week, a young single person. So it is not expensive, and it's far better insurance, frankly, than what Medicare offers. So I disagree with that part of it, but it's something we need to look at. Again, I don't like that the federal government ever started this because we can't afford it as a country, but we need to look at where it's going with the cost.
While Wisconsin's voter ID law has been blocked from implementation this November by the U.S. Supreme Court, they have not overturned the law. The battle is far from over. What is your position when it comes to Wisconsin's voter ID law? Mr. Kitchens.
Well, I think, yes, the Supreme Court, they may well have done the right thing in blocking it because of concerns of not being able to implement it adequately in time. But I fully support the voter ID law. I think it's just common sense. We have to show IDs for virtually everything. You can't buy alcohol, obviously. You can't get any kind of federal assistance of any type without an ID. And I think it's just common sense that we protect the integrity of our voting system. It's one of our most precious rights. I do not intend to restrict people's rights to vote. As they say, it should be very easy to vote, but it should be very hard to cheat. Mr. Majewski, during our last debate, said he had lots of people tell him what a difficulty that would create for them when they voted. I've knocked on thousands and thousands of doors like he has, and I have never met anyone that said it would be difficult. I can't believe that our country can't enact a system where we can't make it easy for people to get IDs, and it's just purely common sense.
Mr. Majewski.
My consistent position will be anything that limits someone's right to vote or put obstacles in the way of their voting is just plain wrong in our democracy. It is a solution, voter ID in search of a problem. There's no credible evidence out there that we have any widespread inappropriate voting, people trying to vote for someone else because we don't have IDs. There's really no significant problem out there. My concern is it's a very subtle attempt to limit the amount of folks to vote. And in a country where, unfortunately, we have a number of citizens who don't exercise their right to vote, any obstacle that we put in the way of that right is just plain wrong. Doesn't make any common sense.
Some elected officials and prominent newspapers have called for the creation of a nonpartisan redistricting process. What kind of redistricting process do you support? What do you think should be the basic principles to guide the redistricting process in our state next time around? And we'll begin with Mr. Majewski.
Well, I have a short answer for this, and folks, you know my position. I've said it many, many times before, and I also support what the Door County Board of Supervisors just recently passed, in which they support changing the redistricting process. It's called gerrymandering. It's been a problem for a long time in a lot of states. Iowa took the bull by the horns, and they realized we need to have more contestable elections in our races. And what they did is they had a nonpartisan board start to redraw their lines. That makes sense on communities, makes sense on populations, makes sense on shifting cultural issues going on in that state. But again, it was nonpartisan. And since they've done that, they've had much more contestable elections and many more people willing to reach across the aisle and compromise. So yes, I would be very much in favor of changing the process.
Well, first off, the primary consideration, of course, every 10 years when they do the census is to align the districts equally in population. I think it's greatly exaggerated how much political, how much that enters into those decisions. If you look at...
Please, let's respect the candidates. I'm sorry, Mr. Kitchens, please continue.
If you look at the state of Iowa, where they do have that nonpartisan board, and you look at the shapes of those districts, it's no different from Wisconsin. We don't have these tentacles reaching out, trying to pull in districts that are more of one party or another. The Democratic Party has had many, many opportunities to change this law as well, and they never chose to. So frankly, I think it's sort of crocodile tears. I'm certainly willing to look at it, but if we're going to do it, we need to have a nonpartisan board, which isn't always the easiest thing to do. At least the way we have it now, people are accountable to the voters. So I'm willing to look at it, but again, I think it's something trying to stir people up, and I don't think it's nearly the problem that it's presented as.
What is your opinion of the use of school voucher programs in Wisconsin? Mr. Kitchens.
Well, school vouchers were begun primarily for Milwaukee, for the inner city failing schools, and I think that was appropriate, and I think that that's where the focus should remain. Our schools within the 1st Assembly District are not failing. We have very good schools. So I think the focus should remain on those failing districts. I know that, again, we had a debate the other day, and Mr. Majewski is opposed to them in those districts as well. But I've seen the Milwaukee schools. I've been in those high schools, and frankly, I don't blame the schools particularly that they're failing so much. It's society that's sort of failing there. But if we can give those kids an opportunity to break out of that cycle of poverty, I think it's entirely appropriate for parents to be as actively involved in their children's schooling as possible, whether it's private school, public school, or homeschooled. And those people in Milwaukee do not have any other options. So I think we need to allow that there. As far as expanding it, I want to look at that very, very carefully. I certainly don't want to be pulling money away from our public schools, and to this point, it has not. So I don't want that to happen.
currently, and this is a point that Joel and I have talked about many times, the voucher school system is taking money away from our public school system. There's only so much money available down in Madison for our public school system. When you start to open up the spigot and give it over to unaccountable, untested, unproven voucher schools, just plain wrong. Now, I'm not taking my position necessarily from my own core values or what I've studied is just plain wrong. I'm hearing from our local school superintendents across the First Assembly who's saying taking money from the public schools to fund unaccountable, untested, unteacher certified schools is just plain wrong. We just had an incident down in De Pere where a voucher school closed, took hundreds of thousands of dollars, disappeared. Now they're down in Florida trying to open up their own school. Same thing that happened in Milwaukee. Again, folks, you can't take money away from public schools and begin another separate school system onto its entirety. Just is not going to work. And our public schools, folks, at a time when our country's divided, when our state has become divided, our public schools are the only entity that's bringing people together for a state conversation. And to try to, again, separate our tax dollars into an unaccountable school system, uncertified teachers, not testing the kids, have no idea what's going on in there, and then a public school system that have to be supported by a number of state mandates, just plain wrong.
In recent years in Wisconsin, we've seen the growth of CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. Some argue that CAFOs generate, that they are efficient and more efficient and keep the cost of food down at the grocery store by maximizing output from limited amounts of land. Opponents argue they generate so much animal sewage and pollutants they present a threat to human health. What is your position on the continued existence and potential growth of CAFOs in Door County and across the state of Wisconsin? And we'll begin with Mr. Majeski.
These are some really good questions here.
Thank the
Very
voters
good.
of Door County.
And well stated, too. Very well stated. Again, being born and raised in Kewaunee County, Kewaunee County has changed. We have some very large farms in Kewaunee County. But large farms in Kewaunee County are here to stay. I mean, it's the nature of the business model, and it's a very lucrative, successful business model. It's an employer of a lot of folks down in Kewaunee County and also in the Southern Door area, too. So they're here to stay. But the bottom line is they can't hurt our environment. They can't pollute our groundwater. Now, this is an area that I got involved in early on in February, even before I decided to run, and attending a number of court hearings down in Green Bay. And when I heard that the DNR said they're not responsible for groundwater, and the health department says they're not responsible for groundwater, something is broke at the state level, folks. And that's got to change. And what I feel has been, what's created the issue more so than anything else is not the large farms in Kewaunee County, but it's the lack of state leadership in dealing with the expansion of the farms. We're dealing with regulations that are over 20 years old. They're for farms that are 100, 200 cows, not for farms that are 5,000 and 8,000 cows. We need to get our state leadership back involved. We need to take a serious look at the expansion of the farms. We need to help them with proven scientific methods to dispose of the manure from the cows. But right now, we have no state leadership, no state help that the officials in Kewaunee County have been continually asking for. If I should be the first representative, you can bet that'll be one of my primary objectives, is to get state help in investigating the situation down in Kewaunee County.
Mr. Kitchens.
Okay, back to the last question. I do want to say, as far as the accountability of schools, I certainly believe in any schools that get vouchers being accountable. And I left that part out of the answer, and he expanded on it. But there's been a movement within the Republican Party as well to push for accountability amongst those schools, so I certainly agree with that. As far as the large farms, as Joe said, yes, they're here to stay. We need to regulate them properly. The biggest problem has been that the state, the DNR, looks at all the areas of Wisconsin, and we have greatly divergent geographical areas. We have the sands, we have what we have with the karst rock, where things flow through very quickly and don't have a chance to be filtered. What we need to do is the DNR needs to recognize that we need to treat these different regions differently. We cannot have one set of rules that applies to those very, very different systems. a couple of Joe's friends wrote letters saying that because I'm a large animal veterinarian, I'm in favor of just allowing the farms to do whatever they want. That couldn't be further from the truth. I want clean water. Our area relies on clean water, both for the tourism industry as well as for the safety of our people. And I've been very active in Kewaunee, and even though I was endorsed by the Dairy Business Association, which was very much opposed to the groundwater ordinance that they enacted, I came out in favor of it. And I have been endorsed by the Wisconsin League of Conservation Voters. So I do want clean water, and we do need to have regulations. I don't think it has to be an either-or situation. I want agriculture to thrive in this area. Make no mistake about that. But we need to control how the manure is handled. And there are a lot of options out there, and we need to explore those, and we need firm regulations that protect our people.
What is your opinion of the growing use of so-called dark money in politics today? And what's your opinion of a potential, one possible solution of dealing with dark money is to promote the creation of a public financing of political campaigns. Please comment on the growth of third-party money in politics as well as a possible solution as public financing. And we'll begin with you, Mr. Kitchens.
Well, I think that, we have a lot of campaign finance laws in place right now. There, you have to report everyone that donates to your campaign, so there's accountability that way, so that it's very clear where the money came from. And I think it's up to the voters to look at that and determine whether that bothers them or not, I guess. As far as the third-party money, and obviously there's been a lot thrown in this race already, which we have no control over. The Supreme Court in 2010 said that they were entitled, those third-party groups, by freedom of speech, are entitled to donate as much money as they want and make as many commercials as they want. So I don't think that we have any control over that. I don't like it any better than you. I've been listening to public radio because they don't have political ads on. But there's really not anything that can be done unless the Supreme Court changes their mind on that, which I don't see happening. As far as public financing, I don't think the rest of the finance system right now is particularly broken. Again, we have strict limits on how much we can take, $500 for individuals and for PACs. So I don't think that public financing is necessary at this point, and that's where I stand, I guess.
Gosh, I'm happy that you listen to public radio, Joe. That's a good thing. All right. Joel is exactly right. We don't have a whole lot of control over that. Supreme Court decision has made. The money that comes into our campaigns is regulated very clearly, and there's very clear disclosure about what comes in and what doesn't come into our campaigns. It's those third-party ads, and one that I'm obviously have been the target of consistently here in the First Assembly that I'm concerned about. But more so than that, I'm concerned about the vast quantities of money that's going into the campaigns right now. And I'm concerned because that controls politicians. Right now, we have a small percentage of people donating most of the campaign dollars across the United States. Who do you think those politicians are accountable to, folks? It's not you and I. They're accountable to that money. So I would like to see significant campaign contribution finance forms come in. I was a big fan of the McCain Feingold Act long ago. Supreme Court threw that out. I'd love to see those things come back, but one thing I'm strongly in favor of is limiting the money that can be spent on campaigns. I think that in itself will have a significant positive effect. And forcing candidates and forcing those third-party ads to use their money much more wiser.
Well, that wraps up our time for the questions for these good two gentlemen here, and we're going to now move to closing statements. According to the coin flip, the first closing statement will be done by Mr. Kitchens. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Okay. Again, thank you for coming here tonight, and thanks for putting this on. As I said in my opening, moving to Door County 30 years ago was one of the best decisions of my life. My father was a special agent in the FBI, so we moved every 2 or 3 years while I grew up. So really, Sturgeon Bay is the only hometown that I've ever known, and I couldn't have chosen any better. Starting a business was sort of a life-changing experience for me, and it has really affected how I view the economy and certainly the role of government. And this is an area where Joe and I differ very much. We didn't even get into jobs tonight, amazingly enough, which both of us have put down as our top priority. But Joe, a quote from him the other night in our debate was, "One thing clearly distinguishes us. Joel thinks businesses create jobs, I don't." He's absolutely right. That clearly does distinguish us. I do believe that businesses create jobs, and I think that we need to be an ally to our businesses in creating those jobs. It's not the whole picture as far as job creation. We also need workforce development. But certainly, we need to help those businesses and be a friend to them and not be constantly throwing roadblocks in front of us. In my job, I travel from Washington Island down to Kewaunee County. I deal with very wealthy people that own horse farms and very large farms, and I deal with people working a second job just trying to hold on to their small family farm. In the last 6 months, like Joe, I've knocked on thousands of doors and listened to the concerns of all of our people. You know, I know our people, and I know our area, and I really believe that I can represent them well. You know, when I knock on these doors and you kind of hand them your card, they kind of look it over, and my card, and I don't think his does either, says what party we're in. So one of the first things a lot of times I'll say is, you know, what party are you? And I kind of say Republican and then hold my breath. Because, you know, sometimes, of course, they shake your hand and say, hey, you got my vote. And then other times they give me my card back. But the huge majority of the time, what you hear, if you ask them, are you aligned to one party in particular, is that they want someone that can work with both sides. And that's what I can do. You know, everyone gives lip service to that, but I've proven that I can do it. On the school board for the past 15 years, I've worked with wildly divergent viewpoints, and I've earned their respect, and we've gotten along. I gave a welcome back speech to the teachers this past fall, and I got a standing ovation from the teachers. Not a lot of Republican politicians have gotten standing ovations from teachers in the last couple of years, but I think it shows that even though they know that I'm a Republican and they may disagree with me, that I will always listen to them and we can talk these problems over, and that's what I want to bring to this office. You know, you can train a monkey to go down there and vote the party line and go along with things. I want to be a guy that goes down there and is a strong voice and helps to shape the platform of my party as well as the state and the future of our state. So I would appreciate your vote very much on November 4th, and thanks again for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Kitchens. Mr. Majeski?
You know, folks, when folks look at my card, I go to the door, they look at my picture and they hold it up and say, wow, that was taken a few years ago, wasn't it? They do, and yeah, it was. Just to clarify something that Joel had mentioned about the jobs and about economy, I do have great respect for our businesses. I am a small business owner. I managed a multi-million-dollar medical clinic business for over 6 years. I have great respect for the folks and the risks that they take. Our small businesses are really under attack in a lot of ways right now, and I want to work to try to help them get easy credit. I want to work to try to help them promote their products locally here, and I want to work to help them be their lobbyists down in Madison. So I want to make that clear. Now, regarding whether or not I think who creates jobs, folks, it's the consumers. It's the purchasers of those services who create jobs. Now, it's also the business owners who take that risk and provide that services. But if our middle class has no money to spend, and we have been declining over the last 20 years in terms of our purchasing power, our small businesses don't have much to expand, and they can't create jobs. So that's an area that we do definitely differ on. You know, we're nearly at the end of the campaign, and you can bet that all of these candidates are just a little tired. We have both worked hard. And you know, I think you're also tired too. I think you're tired of the mailers, and I think you're tired of these phone calls and TV ads, and I think you're tired of the negative, misleading, false information that's out there. As you know, I've decided to go on a different path. I've knocked on over 10,000 doors. I've decided to listen and to learn to the constituency out here. In fact, I'm approaching 13,000 right now. But I've done so in a respectful and a polite manner. And I have pledged to continue that campaign in a respectful and a polite manner. Because you can't work together if you're just constantly taking cheap shots at your opponents. That's just not leadership, folks. We need a better way in order to determine our candidates for our legislative office, and we need a better way to have discussions down in Madison. Unfortunately, right now, in this room and throughout this first assembly, there's a lot of invisible, amazingly wealthy investors walking through our district with misleading, negative information. It's unprecedented in our small community, and it just shouldn't be tolerated here. They want government to work solely for them. and they want their candidates that they have invested in to work solely for them. That's not this candidate. I have pledged not to go down that direction. And because of that, I've lost some big donors. There's no doubt about it to my campaign, because they said, Joe, you can't win if you don't go negative. Well, guess what? If that's the case, if that's what it takes to win, if that's all you need to sacrifice your honesty and your integrity to win, it's not for me. But you know, maybe that's what leadership is. Because I think here in the First Assembly, we are leaders.
Thank you,
And I think
Mr.
here in the
Majewski.
First Assembly, we can be leaders for the rest of the state.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Our candidates for Wisconsin State Assembly, Mr. Joel Kitchens and Mr. Joe Majewski.
One more.
We'll begin with his one-minute opening statement. Mr. DeBrew.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for coming, and Peninsula Pulse for putting this on. This is a great event. I've been a special education teacher for the last 20 years. Before that, I worked in a factory for 8 years as a welder and machine operator, and then decided to go back to school a little later in life. While I was in college, I started my own roofing and siding business and ended up getting so busy that my brother quit his full-time job and came on board, and then he took the business over after I completed my degree and became a special education teacher. I also served for 20 years in the Wisconsin National Guard. So I have a lot of different experiences that I can bring into politics, hopefully bring more balance down to the state capitol, and go down to the capitol and represent you, the working people of Senate District 1. Thank you.
Senator?
Good evening, folks. Thanks for coming. Thanks for paying attention. These are important choices, interesting choices we have going on in our state. And I enjoy working for you. I like working for you. I've worked in the Assembly prior to working in the last 4 years in the State Senate. I've done a variety of other things. I was a town chairman for 4 years down in Brown County, and I've sold real estate. I've worked in the insurance industry as a supervisor. I've sold manufacturing computer systems, so I've been in a lot of different manufacturing companies. And I like to take a balanced approach. I like to be sensible, offer common sense solutions. I do believe our government is already too big, too expensive, and takes too much. And the government also does a lot of good things for people. It's necessary, and we have to find a balance and work that out. So it'd be interesting to talk through all of the issues, and appreciate your attention.
Our first question relates to the Wisconsin Transportation Fund Amendment, which is on the ballot with you this November. This amendment would require that revenue generated by the transportation fees and taxes be deposited into the State Transportation Fund, removing the legislature's traditional authority over these funds. Do you support or oppose the Transportation Fund Amendment? Why or why not? And we'll begin with you, Senator Lessay.
I support it. I voted for it in the legislature. In order to change our constitution, it has to pass the legislature twice and then go to a ballot and a referendum of the people in a major election. I think it's a very good idea to protect this fund. Part of the reason that it's kind of an easy choice to raid is that you get favorable bond ratings when you're borrowing money at the government level to build things, not when you're using it to pay ongoing expenses. So it's easy to raid. So if you're spending $1 billion of cash building roads and bridges and other things, and you take that $1 billion and spend it on other government things, and then you borrow that money, which then causes a repayment issue down the road, you have this extra $1 billion to spend, and that's been dipped into by the legislature and the governors in the past. I think it's wrong. We are under pressure, and we actually need to find more ways to put money into our transportation to meet those needs, and there are a variety of different methods, and I support those, and I very much support this amendment, and I urge you all to vote for it.
Mr. DeBrew?
Well, I believe that you elect representatives to go down to Madison to make decisions, and that's why we have a representative government. This doesn't belong in the Constitution. This is a budget issue, and you don't want to put budget issues in your Constitution. You elect representatives to represent you down in Madison to make those decisions. There are times, we just went through the worst economy since the Great Depression, and you have to have some flexibility on certain times to use some money that you may have put away for other things. Think of your own budget at home. I'm saving right now to buy a new car someday. Now, if I lose my job, I might have to use that money for other things like food or things that I need immediately. I do believe that should be segregated, but it should be segregated within the budget, and we can do that without having to change the Constitution.
Wisconsin declined to open its own exchange under the Affordable Care Act and declined to accept the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Do you think this was the right decision? Why or why not? We'll begin with you, Mr. DeBrew.
I think this was the wrong decision. We left over $200 million of federal money on the table, and that federal money went to other states. And it didn't lower your federal taxes any. You all paid into the federal government, and you didn't take your share of the money back. A lot of the arguments used to not take that money are because someday the federal government might not live up to their obligation. None of the federal programs that are offered to the state have longevity. They're not guaranteed, so why should this be any different? The federal government will live up to its obligation. It's scheduled to go down to 95%, so it's largely going to be covered, and that fear was simply wrong, and it was made politically, for political motivation purposes. We should take that money so that we can make sure that we provide access to over 80,000 people to affordable health care.
Senator?
First of all, the Obamacare exchanges. There existed prior to this, and they still do, ehealthinsurance.com, and there are others on the internet where you can purchase insurance from dozens of companies with hundreds of products without government involvement, without government subsidy, without government paying for it at all. The federal government spent multi-billions on this exchange. It hasn't worked very well. The states that have gotten into it have spent hundreds of millions of dollars per state to make this work, and it hasn't been working very well at all. So that was a bad idea. I'm very glad that we didn't get into creating a Wisconsin Obamacare exchange. That was a very bad decision. Also, for the first time now, all adults who are at the poverty line or below are on Medicaid or are eligible for Medicaid if they choose to do so. That wasn't true in the past, whether it was Republican or Democrat administrations. So we didn't have enough room to take all people to put them on Medicaid if they're below the poverty line. I think that's a good decision. It's a good thing. Medicaid is the fastest growing part of our budget. In the last year, the spending on Medicaid went up by 11%. It continues to be a multi-billion-dollar issue for our state, and it continues to grow faster than any other part of our budget with the existing people on it. This accepting the money, one of the things that we overlook and the other side doesn't talk about is the fact that Medicaid reimbursable rates, we are one of the lowest in the nation. I've advocated over the years to increase it. The state does control it, and we get revenue sharing back from the federal government to pay for it. The problem is that we grossly underpay for those medical services. So in fact, if you have private insurance, the more people who go on Medicaid, the higher your premiums go on the other side of the equation, the private pay side of the equation. The other thing is the federal government is $17 billion in debt, or $17 trillion in debt and growing. Just to give you an idea of how much $1 trillion is, and we are still growing at this rate. I'll come get to that in another question. I'll save some of my time for that. I see we're up.
Okay, thank you, Senator. You have vastly different positions when it comes to minimum wage in the state of Wisconsin. Proponents of an increase argue there's no way you can raise a family getting paid $7.25 an hour. Opponents of an increase argue that if you artificially raise business labor costs, you'll be forcing businesses to lay people off. What do you think is an appropriate minimum wage for Wisconsin, and should there even be a minimum wage? Senator Lessay.
It's interesting. It's an interesting question. My daughter worked through, and she's now a sophomore at the University of Madison, and she worked for the minimum wage at McDonald's at $7.25 for a couple years. And I asked her this question, and I think she gets it immediately. She said, "I wonder how much a Big Mac would cost if it was $10.10 an hour." It will increase the cost of a lot of things out there that all kinds of people buy, including those this is directly aimed at to help. I don't think the minimum wage was ever the idea for a family to support themselves at minimum wage. We have a lot of opportunities in this state to take advantage of tech colleges, other education, to make yourself more valuable. Our economy is expanding again. I think that's a good thing. So people are able to go to work, better themselves. Yeah, it takes extra work. Yeah, it's hard. Yes, you have to work to support yourself and go to school to get better, or live your life in such a manner that you don't have to work, get yourself prepared, but make yourself valuable, and I think that's important. Having said all of that, I looked at the facts of this, and it was about 5 years ago that the federal government established the current minimum wage. I don't believe Wisconsin should have a Wisconsin-specific minimum wage. I think it should be more of a federal issue, but an inflationary increase would put it about $8, so I think eight and a quarter increase at the federal level for across the country makes sense. In Seattle, where they instituted a $15 for the city of Seattle, a $15 minimum wage, what employers have done there and people who are selling services have added a 15% surcharge on everything you buy in Seattle to pay for the minimum wage that they put on in Seattle. It has real-world effects. It does affect real people. It's a real issue. It's good to be talking about it. I don't think Wisconsin should have a Wisconsin-specific different from the federal government.
Mr. DeBrew?
I think the minimum wage should be $10.10 an hour, and we should increase it over time so businesses have a chance to adjust to that. I think we can afford to pay a few cents more for a Big Mac, and that's really what it would be. I would challenge Senator Lycea to try and live on $7.25 an hour. It's impossible. In fact, if you're working full-time and living or earning $7.25 an hour, you're going to qualify for many federal subsidies, food stamps and things like that. So by raising the minimum wage, we can actually lift people out of poverty and get people off of food stamps and not have to rely on government support. And a job should not hold you down and hold you in poverty. A job should lift you out of poverty, and that's what raising the minimum wage will do.
Apparently, people in this room feel very strongly about the issue of the funding mechanism for our schools in Door County and across the state of Wisconsin, with the number of questions we've received here. It seems that many feel that schools in Door County are unfairly treated by the current school funding formula. What, if anything, would you change about the manner in which we fund our schools in Wisconsin? Mr. DeBrew.
Yes. The funding formula went in, as Mr. Majeski said before, around 1992, and it locked many school districts into the funding levels that they were at in 92, and then that went forward for the last 20 or so years. What you have in Door County is a combination of a couple things. You have a property-rich school district and income poor, and if you've seen the numbers, the levels of poverty have consistently been increasing year after year after year. And we need to take a new look at the funding formula and rework it and make sure that every school district has at least adequate funding from the state. And from there, we can move forward in the state of Wisconsin because we deserve better. And Ashwaubenon, where I teach, is in the same boat. We're a negative aid school district, so we get penalized for every dollar that we try to raise. So we have more money leaving the school district than we have coming in from the state.
Senator?
Across the state, on a statewide average, we're spending about $12,500 per child educating our kids. It's very important. My kids have been getting a good education in the public school system. I think it's good. It's working in many ways. Up here in Door County, they talk a lot about it, and across the Senate district, there are so many different school district situations. Each one is different. There are 425 school districts, and I represent now some school districts like up here where they're spending $19,000 or $20,000 a kid, and they're paying $3 or $4 a thousand for the school cost. Yes, they aren't getting a lot of state aid, but down on the other side of the district, there are school districts that are paying $10 or $12 a thousand and spending at or below the statewide average. So it's very different. It's a complicated formula. I think we do need to change it, particularly in the area, and I've been striving to get the votes, because that's how you change things. You have to get the votes in both houses of the legislature and get the governor to sign it. To change the formula where it concerns districts that are adding students, They get a lot of money to spend, so you add 10 students and you're spending at the average, you get $125,000, and you can put 10 students into a school without having to add any staff or do anything different. On the other hand, you lose 10 students, and there's, it's an averaging over a few years, and there's a variety of things, but you lose 10 students, and you have to cut your budget by $125,000, a very, very difficult task. And that's very unfair. I've been striving to get the votes because I'd like to change that and make it fair on both sides of that equation so it can be done in a revenue-neutral manner, so we aren't increasing taxes, increasing aids, but doing it so it's fair to the school districts across the state.
The 2011 Wisconsin Act 10, also known as the Wisconsin Budget Repair Bill, dramatically curtailed the rights to collective bargaining by government employees. Unions for public employees now cannot negotiate working conditions. They can only negotiate wages, but they cannot exceed a particular cap based on the Consumer Price Index. Employers are prohibited from collecting union dues, and members cannot be required to pay union dues if they're public employees. At some point, these restrictions leads one to consider a more fundamental question. Should public employees have a right to belong to a union at all, or are existing civil service laws sufficient to protect the rights of government workers? Senator Lessay.
What an interesting question. I voted for Act 10. I supported Act 10. President Roosevelt, and we have a long history here in Wisconsin. AFSCME was actually started in Wisconsin, in Madison, in the 1930s. And Wisconsin was the first state to give privileges, not rights. Rights are conferred from God and our Constitution. Government collective bargaining privileges to government unions. President Roosevelt, who signed and was a Democrat and who signed the National Labor Relations Act in the 30s, was very supportive of private unions to offset big businesses. And also he recognized, he's on record, he wrote letters, he gave speeches because there was agitation to create public unions. He was against public unions for the following reasons. Private unions have a co-interest with the business that they're in. They need to make a profit so their employees can get paid, and they can expand and have more opportunities and more ability to pay people more. And also that co-interest, if they get too demanding or have other issues, that private entity can pick up and move someplace else. We've seen that in Boeing in Washington, relocating to another state. But you have a co-interest that's different in the public interest. In the public interest, the county's not going anywhere. The county can't go anywhere. The Ashwaubenon School District or the Gibraltar School District cannot go anywhere. So they are here. And what President Roosevelt recognized is that public unions would get involved in the public process of electing representatives to sit at the bargaining table. So you'd have somebody representing the government employees who get wages from the government and the taxpayers and people they helped elect, and who would represent the people who get the services from the government and pay the bills for their services from the government when that public process gets corrupted or self-interest of the people who work in it get to work and create this environment that led us to Act 10.
Mr. DeBrew?
Well, the question was, should public employees be able to exercise their First Amendment right to associate? And I believe they should. And President Roosevelt wasn't against public unions. He was against putting it in the federal government. He wanted to leave it up to the states. So, yes, we should have a right to form a union and belong to a union. We don't give up our rights as public employees to the Constitution. What we really need to look at here is what was Act 10 really all about? And Act 10 was not about a budget and fixing a budget. Act 10 was about taking the voice of public employees away from the employees. And who knows best how to do the job? The people who are doing it. And that's who needs to have a voice. So when you were interviewing your sheriff candidates up here, both of them were talking about how they need to listen to their employees and so forth. And that's what we need to do in our state and reinstate those rights. They cut $1.6 billion out of our public schools at a time they created voucher schools and funneled millions of dollars into the school district or into the private school districts. So This wasn't about budgets, it wasn't about fixing anything, it was about attacking political opponents and taking the voice away from the people who actually do the work.
We've received some questions about voicing concern about high-capacity wells and center pivot spraying. What do you think Wisconsin needs to do to ensure the protection of its groundwater? Mr. DeBrew.
Well, we have a serious problem in northeast Wisconsin. We have a dead zone in the Bay of Green Bay that's almost the size of Kewaunee County. We have 30% of the wells in Kewaunee County are polluted, and people can't drink the water. We have beaches closing, and in an area that relies so heavily on tourism, we have to have clean water, clean air, and a clean environment. So the state needs to be involved in that and make sure that we can enact local ordinances like they did in Kewaunee County to prevent the spreading of manure during months when it's frozen. And the Kewaunee County Board took a courageous step forward. They passed it unanimously. Now they're afraid that they're going to face a lawsuit that's going to wipe their ordinance out and make it ineffective. The state needs to make sure that local communities have the ability to pass environmental ordinances to protect their community members. But they can do it at the same time and make sure that businesses can operate and have balance between the two.
Senator?
We have something we agree on. We should have balance. And we want clean water. Clean water is very important. And we do have wells that are contaminated in Kewaunee and elsewhere. My grandparents, back a few years ago in De Pere, they were getting their well water from a spring nearby, didn't really realize it, and then found out they did. And they actually had to drill their well 600 feet to get water in Brown County. And these wells that are contaminated in Kewaunee, the question I keep asking is, and I've searched to, and the DNR doesn't keep statistics on it, is how deep is your well? Because if you're in this karst formation, and in some places there's 20, 50, 70, 100 feet of topsoil, it's not very much, before the very porous limestone. If you're down 50 feet, 100 feet, it's too shallow. And yeah, there's a problem there. And we need to address those problems. And there are issues with our large farms. Our large farms are more heavily regulated than our small farms. So they're continuing, and there's a tension there. I think what Kewaunee did is a good example of a local government taking action and moving us forward. We do have to move forward. And with statewide laws, we have to have statewide, you have to get the votes. You have to get votes to change the laws, and we need to continue to push in this area. Clean water is very important. It's very important to everyone. It's important to this region. It's important to just a variety. It's just one of the very fundamentals that we have. The other issue is we have very thin topsoil throughout this area. It extends down into Brown County. Where I was raised, it extends far below that, and we need to take all of that into balance.
From reading your websites and comments in the media, it's clear that you have very differing opinions on the appropriate role for government regulation of the business community. Please share with us your general philosophy about government regulation. If you feel there is too much regulation, please give us a specific example of a Wisconsin law or regulation that you would like to repeal and explain why. Conversely, if you feel otherwise, please give us a specific example of a business practice in Wisconsin that you believe is appropriately regulated and explain why. Senator Lessay.
Again, there's a balance, and I think one of the primary responsibilities of our government is to protect the weak from the strong, to protect the environment from those bad actors out there. I think most people, and large farmers are a great example, they usually live on their farms or very close by. They've usually been there for generations. They have a self-interest, and for their family, and they tend on having their kids there as well. So they want to make sure that things are good there. And then we need to have a balance on that. Wisconsin has a history of taking federal regulations that are often overreaching and then jumping on them immediately, adding a lot of things to them, then sending them to the local governments, blaming the federal government, and then the local governments adding even more regulations on top of that and blaming the state and the federal government, making a morass of very difficult things to deal with. So continuing, there are things that, working with the DNR, sometimes with them, sometimes against them, One of the things going on right now is there's a movement, and it's inconsistent across the state, it's inconsistent across the state Senate district, is requiring towns to get flood studies whenever they replace culverts. So a town goes in, they replace a mile of road, you've got culverts along where everybody's driveway is, and now there's flood studies that are required. And it's, again, inconsistent. It's not even a law. It's not even a written rule. It's just some DNR agents are requiring this when they feel like it. And I think for that instance, and that local control, as local governments, and I was a town chairman, we used to make the annual drive around all the roads, look at all of them, find out where they're backing up. We don't need quite that type of regulation, and it should be spelled out either as administrative rule or legislation. There are a variety of others that fit into this category, but those add expense, and again, in the transportation area, when you're spending money on a unnecessary flood study, it's not money that's being put into a road or into a bridge or other fundamental transportation needs. And those are major problems. We have a variety of those sort of things in that area. It fits private businesses as well, and there are a variety of other instances I could tell you about in that area.
Mr. DeBrew.
Well, this is a case where, Frank is trying to play both sides because he says he believes in local control, but when it comes to high-capacity wells, he voted to block local communities from considering cumulative effects of wells. And that's a local ordinance or local way a local community can protect its citizens. What we need to do is realize that regulations are living, breathing things. And as times change, we need to change regulations. If you look at what Kewaunee County did, for instance, they're taking a step forward and trying to move to the 21st century. We have farm regulation right now that was written for 20 years ago. And we need to update that, bring it into the 21st century so that we can farm sustainably. And sustainability is the key. And when we do that and we think of what is the impact going to be on our citizens, how is it going to protect our citizens, and how is it going to allow for a business or a farm to operate in an efficient manner, that's how you develop regulation.
Statistics show that women still earn just a percentage of what men earn for the same work. How significant a concern do you believe this to be? And what, if anything, will you do to address this issue? Mr. DeBrew.
Well, I would support the Equal Pay Act because I think if a woman does the same job as a man, she ought to be paid the same. And the same thing with a veteran. If they're doing the same job as somebody else, they ought to be paid the same. So I would support reinstating the Equal Pay Act that was repealed, and Senator Lassay voted to repeal that act. So, and the rationale that they gave to repeal it is that it was clogging up the courts. Although there were no cases that were brought forward, by having the law, we make sure that our employers understand that they have to follow the law, and it's also easier for somebody to file a case in state court and much more expensive for them to do so in federal court. So the federal laws don't necessarily protect you as well as the state laws do.
Senator?
My wife and I, we have 6 daughters. We're a blended family, so this is important. We each have 3 daughters. Together we have 6. It's important that everyone is treated fairly. And we have federal laws against this. We also have an EEOC that's quite aggressive. And they get involved in no business wants to be fighting with their federal government. You don't do very well in that. To create another state structure so you can create more regulation, more involvement is not a very good idea. So that's why I supported the change in that law. We do have a very aggressive federal government in so many ways. Going back to the federal government and how much $1 trillion is, 1 billion seconds is almost 12 days. I'm sorry, 1 million seconds is almost 12 days. 1 billion seconds is almost 32 years. 1 trillion seconds is almost 32,000 years. To pay off our $17 trillion national debt, we could pay $17 a second for 32,000 years and then start on the interest. Why is that important? Going back to Obamacare, going back to the Medicaid expansion, going back to other things. The federal government Now, records, we're down to only $500 billion of excess spending each year. At some point, the interest on all of that debt will squeeze out our commitments to Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, defense, you name it. It's a major problem, and to take more and have our federal government continue to overspend and to help them overspend is a major problem, and our states should be pushing back against the federal government overspending, because it will harm all of our kids and grandkids and our elderly over time.
With violence in our schools on the rise, schools in Colorado, Arkansas, and elsewhere are beginning to extend the right to carry a concealed weapon to teachers in the classroom. Legislation to this effect has also been proposed in Tennessee and Michigan to varying degrees of success. What is your position on allowing teachers, principals, and other school personnel to carry concealed weapons in the classroom? Senator Lessay.
Well, at one time, I thought it was a good idea, and I've heard from a lot of people who, I guess I had more trust in teachers than they have. So I'm not so sure anymore. And I've been in the legislature for a number of years now, and I made that suggestion in 2006 and was really punished for it. So, there's no proposals in the state legislature. There hasn't been any proposals in the state legislature to move forward in that direction, nor do I think we should.
Mr. DeBrew?
I think it's a crazy idea. I've been a lifelong hunter, 20-year veteran in the Wisconsin National Guard, actually in the infantry. I know how to use weapons and use guns. I would not dream of or even want to have a gun in a classroom. I work with students who have severe emotional and behavior disabilities, and I've worked at the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level. The amount of training that one would need to be able to safely use a handgun in a school situation is extensive. We need to leave that up to the professionals. And I have to sometimes, and teachers sometimes have to get physically involved with a student. And can you imagine having to hold on to a student and have a gun strapped to your side? That would be an extremely dangerous situation. So this is a crazy idea and should not be pursued.
That's all the time we have for questions this evening. We'd like to now move on to closing statements. We'll begin with Senator Lessay. Senator, you have 3 minutes.
Well, I guess I'd reiterate again that I like working for you. I'd like to continue working for you. I have a long record in the legislature. You know what you're getting with me. I'll continue to work with the other side. I generally don't talk about the number of bills I passed this past legislative session. 17 of the bills that I authored were signed into law. They were all bipartisan bills. There's a lot of talk that goes around about how we don't work together, but in fact, more than 90% of the laws that the governor signed this last legislative session were bipartisan bills. And often there is a very stark choice. I've served in the legislature when our budgets became late because we had divided government. We had Democrats in control of one branch of the government, and I get frustrated calls or letters from my constituents who said, why can't you guys just get together and do what's best for Wisconsinites? And then I would write them back and say something to this effect. The Democrats want to raise your taxes by $3 billion. I promised you that I wouldn't vote for a tax increase. Would you like me to capitulate and vote for their tax increases and the growth in government? Would you like me to search for a compromise at, say, $1.5 billion? Or would you like me to keep my promise to you? Generally, we didn't get a lot of response from folks at that point. But there are some very stark differences on some very important issues that I don't know that we're going to bridge those gaps. But I can tell you that I've worked very hard on issues that were often could be considered partisan or at least divisive to get Democrat votes to work through the issues so that they were fair to everyone. They're fair to the little guy, fair to the big guy, and that's our government's role. The other part that I believe in, a guiding philosophy that I have, is that our state of Wisconsin, our government should do the most good for the most people with the money that we have without raising taxes. And if there's extra money left over after we've banked some, and this is the first time we have a couple $100 million banked in a rainy day fund, and I'm proud of that. I've advocated that for years. finally we have the votes to do it. But after funding a reasonable rainy day fund, we should let the folks who earn the money keep their money, and we should give some breaks in taxes and let them keep their money that they earned. And that's what I strive to do, meet our commitments. As I said, Medicaid is going up by 11%, the fastest growing area of our budget. We've increased funding for schools again. And I'll remind you folks on the area of Act 10 is what happened was so many people back 6 years ago with the economy not doing very well, lost their jobs, had pay cuts that they didn't like, and yet government unions demanded more pay, more benefits, and didn't want to contribute for their health care at all, and they didn't want to contribute for a very generous retirement system. Often the government servants, and I'm one of them, people who work for the government, and I believe they should all be compensated fairly. Often their benefit package and pay is better than the people that they work for in the private sector, and I don't think that's right. So Act 10 was about resetting that. And then we had a collective temper tantrum that my opponent here, who also doesn't tell you, because he must not be very proud of it, he's been a teachers union president for, what, a decade or two? So he's been leading the effort on the teachers union side. He's worked in the teachers union side, and he doesn't really want to talk about it. So again, I'd like to work for you, and I'll listen to all of you. We may not always agree, but I do believe I represent the majority of the constituents that I work for.
Thank you, Senator. Now, Mr. DeBrew.
Well, Frank
minutes,
likes to
please.
talk about debt and all those things, and what we have right now is over a $1 billion shortfall in our budget because they passed an irresponsible tax cut that primarily went to the upper income levels. We're also borrowing more money in the state of Wisconsin, almost $15 billion. Almost the whole budget is borrowed. So we're living on borrowed time, borrowed dollars. We need responsible leaders to go down to Madison to work together to come up with ways that we can solve problems in the state without dividing and conquering. Mr. Lissay is right. I have been a union leader because I've been elected by my peers to represent them and advocate for children, advocate for schools, and advocate for workers. And I'm an advocate, and that's why I got involved with this election. I decided to run because of you. I'm not running for me, I'm running for you, because you deserve to have better in Wisconsin. We can do better. Our job numbers are lower. We have less new business startups in almost every state in the nation. We can do better than that. We need to create more venture capital and make it available so we have new business startups in the state. Small businesses actually create more jobs than large businesses. So we need to do more to make sure that we're able to start small businesses and we have entrepreneurs and moving into the high-tech areas in particular. We have a skills gap in the state of Wisconsin. We have over 76,000 jobs that are open right now that we don't have enough skilled people to fill those jobs. Senator Say voted to cut funding to the technical college at a time when we have a skills gap. We need to do more with the technical college to make sure we have people who can fill those good-paying, family-supporting jobs. So I'm proud of what I've done as a teacher. I'm proud of what I've done as a veteran. I'm proud of what I've done as a football coach and starting my own business. And I'm also very proud to have the support of my wife right here in the audience tonight. So thank you, Kathy, for everything you've done to support me. And the other thing that I will do, and this is something that the senator has failed to do, I will make sure that I come back to your community on a yearly basis to hold listening sessions throughout Senate District 1 so I keep my feet firmly planted right here in Senate District 1 where I actually live. Thank you.
Thanks to all of the voters of Door County for submitting their questions tonight and by email in advance of this session. Video of tonight's forum will be available online after 7 p.m. tomorrow. Visit www.ppulse.com for the link. On behalf of the Peninsula Pulse, I'm Brett Bicoy of the Door County Community Foundation. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a good evening.
Right around the corner. Yeah, it'll be nice when it's over. Yeah.